Go ahead, Gopi.
ಹಾಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. I'm Gopi K, your host for today. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, very warm welcome to all the wonderful viewers for the 20th edition of Online Samvada. We had amazing 19 episodes of Samvada from VHS Karnataka until now, including last before Friday on nationalism and divinity are my two eyes by Sri JVC Sri Ramji. What an amazing session was that. Hindu civilization dates back to many thousands of years and is only continuous ancient civilization today. Many ancient civilizations vanished from Earth mostly due to invaders who were brutal against other civilizations. Their only goal was brutally destroy the local indigenous civilizations and take over the wealth, women, and kingdoms. Sindhu Saraswati civilization was no exception on getting invaded by the Islamic invaders and the colonizers for the last 1,000 years. Muslim invaders butchered millions of Hindus, looted their wealth, property, women, and converted many millions into Islam by sword. Colonizers were equally worse. Goan Inquisition was one of the bloodiest, where thousands of local Hindus were butchered and rest were converted into Christianity by Christian missionaries. Colonizers divided our society for their advantage and created brown sahibs who were loyal to the colonizers. This continued even today, even after power transfer in 1947. Originally, we had Varna system, which never discriminated anybody by their Varnas. It was Portuguese who introduced the rigid caste system into Bharat and later enforced by the Britishers to divide Hindus. This brown Sahib ran these false narratives for too long, even today. To add to this, our history was written by the invaders and colonizers, and we were brainwashed to look through their prism of false history. Again, that false narrative is run by the brown Sahib even today. Hindus have lost most of their land for thousands of years, bit by bit. If Hindus continue this, they will lose even more. Today's topic on this Samvada is caste, conversion, politics of hatred. To talk about this, we have a special guest speaker, Pandit Satish Sharma ji, a dharmic theologian, Hindu philosopher, yogacharya, and an author by himself. Pandit Satish Sharma ji, after his professional achievements in having been a mathematician, an auditor, an accountant, having held multiple directorships and senior management and IT consultant for over 25 years plus, moves to do dharma. A scholar, TEDx speaker, a pundit of dharmic traditions, and interfaith speaker, appeared numerous times in TVs and the social media channels, and has spoken at multiple gatherings, including colleges, universities, communities at national level, where seekers of truth, wisdom, reality, and harmony congregate. Also a practitioner and teacher of Jnana Yoga, Panditji recently awarded the title of Dharma Samrakshak. Panditji's latest insightful book, Caste Conversion, a Colonial Conspiracy, gives a lot of details. We'll request the author to give insight on this same at the end whenever he does. I'm also joined by Sri Nikunsha ji, VHS Karnataka State President, Sri Kokil Abhilash, and also our technical team, Ramesh in behind. Now I request Sri Kokil Abhilash to invite our special guest speaker to enlighten us with his wisdom. Thank you, Ji. Kokil, please.
Thank you very much, Kopiji. On behalf of VHS Karnataka Samvada, I would like to invite our esteemed guest, Pandit Satish Sharma ji, to enlighten us on today's topic, caste, conversion, and politics of hatred. Over to you, Satish ji. Thank you.
धन्यवाद जी.
Pranam ji, namaskar, and Jai Shri Ram to everybody. Before I start, I'd just like to invoke the blessings of our gurus, of which we are blessed to have many, including one of our gurus who has given me a great deal of support in doing this particular work, Dr. Subramaniam Swamiji. So before I start, I would just like to say the following shloka. Akhanda mandalakaram vyaptam yen characharam tadpadam darshitam yena tasmai shri guruve namaha. Om Gurubhyo Namaha, Gurubhyo Namaha, Om Gurubhyo Namaha. And thank you so much for VHS Karnataka for hosting this session. It's on the subject of caste, as we have talked about, but it's a very, very important subject which reaches all of our Hindu brothers, sisters, daughters, and sons, not just in Karnataka, not just in Bharat, but it has now, in the last year, begun to affect all of us all over the world. And so I'm going to share with you how it is that a person like myself, who's been living in the United Kingdom for over 55 years, had to then start to understand more about the history of caste, exactly what it was, where it came from, and then to understand how it can be used as a tool for leveraging, controlling, and inciting hatred, which is what my journey has taken me through. So I'm going to resort to a little bit of technology. Do bear with me if it doesn't work, but I think it should be okay. Gokilji, I'm just going to flip to the screen. Oh, wonderful, that's worked. Thank you very much. So, caste conversion and the politics of hatred is the subject of my talk today. And I want to just start with why we're having this conversation. As I say, I've been in the United Kingdom for almost 55 years. And in that time period, I would say for at least 50 years, 49, 50 years, I had never needed to think about caste, nor did I need to know what it was, what its history was. It was absent. Here in the United Kingdom, for 3 generations, our youngest generation, our 3rd and 4th generation, they had no consciousness of what caste was. They had no idea of this system that was supposedly a deeply entrenched part of our Sanatan Dharma. They had no notion at all. We had managed to dissolve caste consciousness from their understanding. On the 4th of March 2013, an Anglican Christianist, Lord Bishop Harries, he stood in the House of Lords and made the most horrific accusations about the British Hindu community. He said that we were casteist, that we were discriminating against each other, that we hated our own Hindu brothers and sisters because of their castes, and so on. He spoke for about 20 minutes, and then many other lords spoke, and they all condemned the Hindu caste system. And that's where my journey into discovering what this caste issue was began. As I started to research his allegations and his desire to include caste into legislation. On the other side, Christian Dalit activists appeared in the United Kingdom, and it was clear that they hated Hinduism, and they began to malign us, they vilified us, and I watched as Christian leaders, white Christian leaders here in the United Kingdom, they loved it. So on the surface, I understood that what they were saying appeared to be benign, but the practical reality was that caste discrimination was not our lived experience. I'd been working with mandirs. I knew most of the committees of some 300 plus mandirs, Sanatani mandirs up and down the United Kingdom. And in 40 odd years, we had never had somebody complain that I'd been discriminated against on the basis of my caste. It was never mentioned. It wasn't a feature. And yet all of these people were saying that we were a terrible community because we discriminated on the basis of caste. So this was a discrepancy that needed to be addressed. So our objectives were to provide evidence that caste discrimination is nothing to do with Sanatani Shastra. Remember, everybody who leverages caste for political advantage they always talk about caste being the reason why a person should leave Hinduism. And leaving Hinduism, they should actually then go and become a convert and join Christianity. Caste is one of the biggest reasons put forward, the terrible Hindu caste system, as they call it. So that is something that needed to be addressed. I needed to understand why. Then it became apparent that I was only going to be able to talk about this and defeat this attack on our community if I could also answer the questions as to where did caste come from. If it wasn't in Shastra, and it wasn't in Itihasa, it wasn't in our scriptures, Dharma Shastras or anything, then where did it come from? And where did the Dalit appear, and how did this discrimination come to Bharat? If the Shastra were all saying that we are Atma on a journey to connect with Paramatma, how does a society which believes and accepts in those truths suddenly become infected with a hereditary, hierarchical, endogamous, discriminatory system? I needed to be able to answer that. I also wanted to identify who's benefiting from nourishing and sustaining this idea of caste-based discrimination. And then finally, we needed to find a solution on how to get rid of this caste discrimination issue. So who were our accusers in this country? It's quite strange that we were being accused by people who have a history of being white supremacists, of being colonialists who wreaked havoc. They raped, pillaged, murdered, stole all around the world, Christian supremacists. These were the people who were suddenly taking the moral high ground and saying British Hindus are terrible because they're Hindus and Hinduism is all casteist. This was the allegation that was being made to us by these who are our accusers. And if I recall, Dr. Swamiji, he's published a book recently in which he has recalculated the harm to Bharat of British occupation. And the monetary value that he's managed to establish was that it had cost Bharat in the region of $71 trillion of wealth, assets and wealth extracted from Bharat by the British. The same, and the descendants who were now accusing us without evidence of this caste discrimination. It struck me that I needed to be able to put such a robust argument together that it would not only challenge and successfully challenge these false accusations, but it would place on record a true telling of the history of caste, how it came, where it came from, and that's where I started my work. So what's the definition? If you're going to put something into law, then you must have a definition. And here in the United Kingdom, the only workable definition that they have come up with, and this is not accepted, is that caste is defined as being hereditary, hierarchical, and endogamous. So hereditary means that your caste is something you inherit from your parents. Hierarchical means that some castes are better than others, and there is a vertical hierarchy. And endogamous means that they marry in amongst their own groups. Now, of those, the one which is contrary to equality legislation and equality standards is actually hierarchical. Remember, here in the United Kingdom, we have a hereditary royal family. In fact, Saudi Arabia, there are so many kingdoms where there is still a royal family, and that's hereditary. And that's deemed to be okay. So the hereditary aspect isn't the problem. Endogamous, if one group want to marry within the same group for familiarities, the reasons of familiarity, because if you have similar values in families or communities, there's nothing wrong with looking for partners who understand your values. And so the endogamous aspect, intrinsically and essentially, there is nothing problematical about it, to be perfectly honest. Birds of a feather flock together. French people gravitate towards other French people because naturally there is a shared understanding of values, of teachings, of history, and everything else. So endogamous relationships, essentially taken in isolation in principle, there's nothing wrong with them. Now the hierarchical aspect is where the problem comes in, when one group deem themselves to be better or higher or more powerful or more worthy or superior than any other group. That's where the key issue is, hierarchical. And it's also noteworthy that in Bharat, we never had a hierarchy. Varna has been mentioned. And in Varna, it's, as Dr. Swamiji has so clearly taught and shared is Varna is a separation of powers. But each of those powers in society is necessary for the whole of society to function. So where does the hierarchy come in? And so I put this question to many people, including the Church of England, including the members of the House of Lords in parliamentary committees, that hierarchy is what you're alleging. What's the metric that you're using to measure the hierarchy? Is it wealth? Is it power? What is it? And it's funny because there is no metric that can be universally applied to the notion of caste and Bharat as a hierarchy, which would actually indicate that one group has some sort of preferential status to the others. The Brahmins had access to knowledge, wisdom, they were the teachers. The Kshatriyas had access to wealth and to power, and they were the courageous protectors. We had the Vaishya Parampara, the entrepreneurs, they had access to wealth, monetary assets, and then we had the Shudras who had access to manpower. And all of those are separate, naturally occurring groupings and powers that a society needs. So where's the hierarchy come into it? And nobody was able to tell me a hierarchy, that this is how we measure that one group is higher than the other. In fact, the only hierarchy that stands scrutiny is the threat value to the missionaries and to the colonial occupiers of India. The highest threat came from the educated, those preservers of wisdom and tradition, who were the Brahmin community. The Brahmin community represented the greatest threat to the occupation of Bharat. And history will teach that. If you have a look at the sacrifices that were made by the Brahmin community, although they're a modest community who don't trumpet them, history records that they were at the forefront of every rebellion, that they were very much involved in every challenge to occupation. And they paid the price both in terms of life and in terms of assets. So the only hierarchy that's possible that does apply is the threat level to the occupiers. And this is what formed the hierarchical structures that we are supposedly guilty of. When I referred to who was our sort of accusers, remember at the time when the British came to Bharat, they were a poverty-stricken nation. They were actually just a pirate nation which had acquired its wealth by attacking the Spanish and the Portuguese ships, which used to steal gold from the New World and around the other colonies. And the British would then attack those ships and steal their wealth from them. And this is the society and the civilization that came to Bharat. And this is how they thought of themselves. You'll see here, we have justice depicted as a white lady with a sword in her hand, and she is slaughtering and killing the brown people and educating them as to what justice is. And the other image is one that I've taken from, it's a 1901 print. And you will see that we have Queen Victoria, and here is India portrayed as a woman on her knees begging Queen Victoria for guidance and for civilization. This is the British supremacists' value system. They're the people who came to us, who now were wanting to accuse us of having this terrible hierarchical caste system. They had a mission, the British, of civilizing the heathen, as they called us. In America, there was a campaign which the motto was "Kill the Indian, save the man." And what the campaign was involved in was trying to erase the identity of the indigenous people of the Americas. It's a sanskara replacement, it's ethnocide. It's a desire to completely remove from a person's understanding of who they are every trace of their civilization. It's a horrific crime, and the scale and the intensity and the horror that that crime inflicts on people hasn't yet been fully quantified and understood. But these are the British who came, kill the Indian, save the man. So they were barely civilized, and yet when they came to us, they found a civilization which had been in existence for a long period of time, thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, and a civilization which was built on genuinely being civilized and not being barbaric. And this was a challenge to them. Just to nail that, I don't know whether our watchers were aware, but until the 1960s, the Aboriginals in Australia, and remember Australia was settled principally by British criminals. They were sent by the British to Australia. They classed the indigenous people of Australia as being part of the animal kingdom. They were not even deemed to be human persons, and that's where the term persona non grata comes from. The Anglican, the Christians in Australia, they deemed that the natives, the human beings who lived there, were not actually fully people. They weren't given the status of persons. That's what persona non grata originally meant. They were treated as animals. And this is the group who arrived in Bharat, and they found a place. They came there because of wealth. They came to take assets. They came to trade, as they called it. But really, the practical aspects of what they did was to loot and continue their tradition of piracy on a scale that they had never dreamed of. They didn't call India the jewel in the crown for any other reason except the quantity, the unbelievable treasures that they were able to take from there. But that wasn't the only purpose. They also recognized that there was a civilizational threat. They recognized that if the principles and the teachings and the vidya and the gyan and the knowledge that this civilization has reaches Europe, then all of the things that we have told our populations about civilization, about an angry God, about how you must believe what the church says, all of these things will be shown to be false. And so they saw that the Bharatiya civilization was a threat to them. And this is where they started to try and convert. Bishop Heber was one of the most diligent of the Christians who was troubled by the threat posed by Bharatiya civilization. And what he wrote in his book, he wrote, amongst the pagans themselves, we believe there is no obstacle next to the love of sin so formidable to the reception of Christianity as caste. So he identified this thing called caste as being an impediment for conversion. So that's something that should be noted. They clearly established that there was a way of working within Bharat, some sort of social structure, some sort of social organization, which prevented them from converting people to Christianity. In the same address, he wrote about this institution, and he called it this wonderful institution of India. So he's referring to caste as an impediment to conversion. He's referring to the system as being a wonderful institution of India. So there was no recognition at that time that this is a terrible system which denies people human rights or anything like that. And then in 1844, there was a conference held in Madras, January the 4th, 1844, where a whole lot of missionary orders came together, and they all wanted to talk about caste, about this Indian social system which they couldn't break. And they wanted to find a way in which they could break it. Their records are crystal clear. And even on this occasion, Reverend Joseph Roberts, and I've got his notes, which I've included in my book, he said, and the solemn fact that next to the love of sin, caste is the great barrier in India betwixt the pagans and Christ. So this was a major issue in the same way that we have IT conferences and lawyers gather to hold legal conferences. These missionaries gathered in 1844 to find a way of breaking the social fabric, the harmonious interaction of Bharatiya societies, communities, samajas, jatis with each other. They wanted to find a way of breaking it. And this is where the genesis of today's horrific caste problems arose. The 4th of January 1844 is when the Christianists, intent on destroying the fabric of Bharatiya society, they conceived, formulated and deployed a caste strategy. It's in their notes. From 1844 to 1911, every effort was made to reorganize Bharatiya society so that it could be managed, so it could be controlled, so it could be exploited. And then in 1911, a British census officer reporting from the Punjab, he was conducting the census and he made some notes. And in his notes, he made the following admission, declaration. We pigeonholed everyone by caste, and if we could not find a true caste for them, we labeled them with the name of the hereditary occupation. We deplore the caste system and its effects on social and economic problems, but we are largely responsible for the system which we deplore. In his notes, his report, he further acknowledged that the government's passion for these labels and pigeonholes has led to the crystallization of the caste system, which, except among certain groups, was really very fluid under indigenous rule. So this is a Christian Indian civil servant from Britain recording his observations and what had happened between 1844, when the missionaries set out a campaign to deconstruct Bharatiya community harmony and cohesion, and 1911, when we started to see the results of their social re-engineering. In that report, he also then made this following statement: I have intended pointing out that there is a very wide revolt against the classification of occupational castes. The Bharatiya Janata was refusing to accept that they should be pigeonholed in this particular manner. These castes have been largely manufactured and almost entirely preserved as separate castes by the British government. I hope I'm making my point clear that today's caste system, this terrible system which has been placed as a millstone around the Hindu community's neck, has its genesis in colonialist times, and these are the records which prove that to be the case. In my book, I've also proved that the intent was malicious. The intention was to deconstruct our society. The intention was very much to wreak havoc and to fragment the integrity of the community so that they could be converted into Christians. Turning to Dr. Ambedkar, he wrote this work, Annihilation of Caste. And Dr. Ambedkar and many others rightly condemned the caste system, rightly condemned this notion of a hereditary, hierarchical, endogamous structure, which is how they defined caste. But it must be noted that they were talking about the British fabricated caste system. They were not talking about Jati, Varna. They were not talking about Samaj, Baradri, Kul, Gotra, any of these things. They talk again and again about caste, and caste is not something which is indigenous to Bharatiya civilization, values, or society. Dr. Ambedkar himself, eventually, he understood that Varna was different. Swami Dayanandaji explained it to him. And he wrote in his work, Annihilation of Caste, I must admit that the Vedic theory of Varna is a sensible and an inoffensive thing. It did not admit birth as the determining factor in fixing in place of an individual in society. It recognized worth. Not only did it recognize worth, he still had more to learn. It recognized aptitude. And that was the amazing understanding, the darshan that we had. So how did they do this? How did they move a society over a period of some 80 years from an integrated, harmonious society, largely harmonious society, putting to one side the nonsense about in every community there are rogues, there are villains, but you don't judge a whole community by the rogues and the villains. You judge a community by the best of its people and by its aspirational standards. So how did they convert and transform that society into a society, the society that we have today, which is struggling to overcome the remnants, the residual impacts of this caste system? They did it using the science of hatred. Hatred is a tool of statecraft. It's a tool of social engineering. It's a tool of warfare. And as a Bharatiya civilization, we really have not got a sense that hatred is something worth understanding. Our traditions are very positive. You know, in Punjab, we have Chardi Kala, that everything is getting better and better. We always work for improvement and progress and civilization and evolution and prosperity. But we need now to study the science of hatred. And I'm going to touch on the science of hatred for a few moments. Hatred has two dimensions. One is hatred for oneself, and the other is hatred for some other target group who you want to cause harm to. And how do we instill hatred in an individual? The mechanisms for doing it are extraordinary. They are the original psychological ops, psyops as it's called, in terms of psychological warfare, in terms of manipulation. But both of those have been done to Bharat. And if you have a look at the Bharatiyas of today, there are many who have self-loathing and self-hatred. They hate themselves, they hate their ancestors, and yet they've never scrutinized where that hatred comes from, and indeed whether it's justified. And there are many who hate the other. The other can be any group. And the way in which this hatred was woven into our self-consciousness, into our schools, into the colonialist, Christianist schools that were established, is worthy of study and worthy of understanding, because it continues today. Another thing about hatred, apart from being two-dimensional, is hatred, if it's instilled incrementally, small steps, small words, small thoughts, small policies, if it's introduced subliminally so that people don't realize that's actually what's being done, if the mechanism for instilling hatred is persistent, it's repetitive, what it does is it engenders in a person shame, guilt, and then hatred. Once those seeds are planted, they need to be nurtured and watered, and then there is a mechanism for igniting hatred and reaping the rewards, or inflicting the dreadful harm that can be inflicted as a result of igniting hatred. We need to understand this really clearly. One of the best ways of understanding this, I found, was by Goebbels. Goebbels was Hitler's propaganda master, and he was the architect of the way in which hatred was nurtured against the Jewish people. All of a sudden, the Germans, a hitherto civilized civilization, in the space of a mere decade, suddenly descended to a state where they inflicted such atrocities on the Jewish community. And the steps by which it was done are now called the 5 basic rules of propaganda. I'm not going to go through them one by one. Everybody is welcome to look up the actual details, but the nuts and bolts of it is to make everything simplified: good and bad, friend and foe, right and wrong, left and right. All of these simplifications is reductionism. Then you have a disfiguration process, and what you do is you try and diminish and dehumanize the target of your hatred. We have the rule of transfusion, and what it is manipulating the consensus value for one's own ends. And the Bharatiya Lutyens press have been masters of doing this for such a long period of time. The rule of unanimity, presenting your argument as though it's the natural argument, it's the natural position of every wise, sensible person. And finally, the rule of orchestration, repeating the same message in different combinations, slight different variances. And that's how you transform a society from being peaceful and tranquil and harmonious into a society which can then be manipulated and hatred instilled and harvested. Jordan Peterson, in his book, wrote about how divide and rule works. And I call this the colonialist mantra. And this works all the time. You can identify any area of human activity, and you find a variation in success. Is one group wealthier than the other? Is one group more educated than the other? Does one group have more land than the other? Does one group have more respect than the other? It doesn't matter. You find a distribution of success. You identify one group as a winner, you identify the other group as a loser, and then what you do is you blame the loser, you blame the winners, and you convince the losers that they're losers because of the winners. You then, as the manipulator, you throw in your allegiance with the losers, you revel in your moral superiority, and then you target your resentments towards these newly created enemies. And then you repeat the process. In the book, I have a quotation from Lord Elphinstone, Lord Canning, many of the lords, where they openly declared their intention to use divide and rule. One of them said that divide and rule worked for the Roman Empire, and it will work for us in India. There was a clear intention to use divide and rule, and this is the manner in which hatred becomes a tool of divide and rule policies. Remember, I said hatred has 2 dimensions. It's incremental, subliminal, persistent, repetitive, and then it's nurtured and watered, and then it's ignited. Now, as a very real-world contemporary example, I want to use an example of what was done to ignite hatred. With in Africa, in Rwanda, we had the Rwandan genocide. If you bear with me, here it is. Hutus and Tutsis had been living peacefully for millennia, and yet within the space of about 6 years, they were transformed into two people who were attacking each other. And it's not coincidental. It is noticeable that this happened after the Catholic Church started to become substantially involved in the local politics of the Rwandan people. 800,000 Rwandans killed each other, and the Pope apologized for the Catholic Church's role. But if you observe it from the point of view of the politics of hatred, they did exactly what divide and rule processes advise as the way in which to achieve this. They seeded hatred, they seeded difference, they created conflict, they watered it and nurtured it, and then ignited it. And as a consequence, 800,000 Rwandans killed each other. This is how hatred can be leveraged, and this is how hatred is still being deployed. And we see this being deployed in Bharat on a daily basis, whether it's state against state, whether it's community against community, whether it's religion against religion. The clerics are the ones who leverage the science of decivilization, hatred, the science of decivilization. And you will see the clerics doing this time and time again. I often think that if our human race is to survive, what we need to do is to keep all clerics away from one generation of young children, young people. And after that, we will be clear. The power that clerics can wield and the way in which they seed hatred during the early years of childhood is fundamentally at the bottom of an awful lot of human conflict. I think that would be a wonderful thing. Let me share with you how this element of shame is seeded by hatred. Here in the United Kingdom, we have school teachings for religious education, RE. And I was recently exploring what had been done. A Hindu mother, got in touch and she said, I have just watched a Zoom session where my child was being taught Hinduism by her white Christian religious teacher, RE teacher. And they weren't teaching about yoga, they weren't teaching about Sankhya, the Shatdarshins, or anything like this. They weren't teaching about Vedanta, the Upanishads, the beautiful heart of our traditions. What they were teaching was caste. And this is actually a set of the slides that we use to teach children in school about Hinduism. They started with a conversation about caste. Now just imagine a young Hindu child in a class of white Christians, where the child is maybe one or two, three of them, they're in a minority. And the teacher is teaching everybody about the Hindu caste system. That child is going to feel shame. They're going to feel shame. They're going to feel humiliated. They're going to feel embarrassed about their ancestors. They're going to feel that they really don't want to identify with this terrible system. And this is hatred being seeded. Do you remember what I said about incremental and subliminal? Imagine this teaching. As a class, we're going to read about how the caste system formed. And then they talk about the incorrect interpretations of Shastra, the deliberate misinterpretation and mistranslations, as though they were fact. Then they ask the children to outline the caste system. And this is a picture which shows the primal man, Purusha. But just have a look and think about the impact of this on a child. From the head came the Brahmin priests, Kshatriyas from the arms, Vaishyas. But in the context of the teaching, can you see how the original teaching of viewing all of the human family as one organism and emphasizing that all aspects of the organism are necessary for the organism to survive is transformed into an image of ridicule? As I said, by seeding hatred, by nurturing it, by watering it, a time comes when you can then harvest it. And when that time comes, it's too late, because before people understand what they have done, why they have done it, and they express remorse, a huge number of people have suffered. And as I said, in the case of the Rwandans, 800,000 died. So in my book, I proved that caste was a creation of the British colonialists. I also dug up details here from Hansard, the British Parliament, in which I expanded upon the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act. And that proves how the underclass, the untouchables, as they became known later, was actually created as a deliberate intention of a legal instrument which was passed in the British Parliament. Caste now has become a hate brand, hasn't it? The word caste actually just means class. And I said to the legislators, if caste is the Portuguese word for class, here in England, why do we use the word caste? If you want to legislate for discrimination against classes, then let's use the English word class. But they didn't want to. And in this, we have a revelation. The reason that they wanted to stick with the word caste is because ever since it was seeded into Bharat, the churches globally spread the rumor that caste is a Hindu concept, that caste is a terrible Brahminical concept. And it's now become a trope. And a trope is something that people react to without understanding. And so this caste trope is a seed of hatred against Hindus. What it does is a person who has been seeded with it automatically assumes that a Hindu is guilty. It denies us the right to be viewed innocent until proven guilty. You will have seen this in the United States, where an allegation has been made against two people, I think both of them with Brahmin surnames, and they're having to prove their innocence. But in a court of law, isn't it a fundamental principle that you're innocent until proven guilty? And proof of guilt has to be provided because proof of innocence is impossible to provide. But with a trope, this is what you achieve, hate speech. And this is how you seed hatred. So the objective of my book was to accelerate the removal of the concept of caste from the dharmic mindset. In the book, I call it a caste bomb, that a person who wants to undermine a Hindu merely has to toss in the word caste, and most Hindus will struggle to regain composure. We will become embarrassed because that's how this trope works. But if we can remove the concept of caste and the understanding that it's Bharatiya from people's minds, we reverse that harm. We make our children immune to it. We inoculate them with a vaccine to this mimetic virus. And we start to learn about what was done to us. And then the future of uniting dharmic communities together without caste discrimination becomes a reality. When we know who did it, how they did it, why they did it to us, then we can turn and look at each other and recognize that we're just all members of the same dharmic family who were alienated from each other by people who stole $71 trillion, according to Dr. Swamiji's latest calculations, who killed over 80 million Bharatiya citizens, and then put in a proxy government, a proxy administration to conceal their theft and to keep promoting and to keep nurturing hatred between members of our own family. Imagine a Bharat free of the concept of caste. This is my ambition, this is my hope, and this is, I think, the time has come for us to be able to achieve it. The earth is not flat. I say that because once upon a time, this was also a trope. The Church, the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, they emphasized to their followers that the earth is flat. And if they didn't believe it, there were penalties, there were punishments, often death and imprisonment. That's a trope. Another trope is the trope that to be an Indian, you automatically belong to a caste. It's not true. It's a hate trope. And so I'm going to make a humble request that the book is now available in Bharat. It's only, I think on Kindle Unlimited, it's free of charge. It's only about 399 rupees. We've priced it so that anybody can buy it without any difficulty, and anybody can buy it and share it and distribute it and spread the understanding within it so that we can remedy this latent hatred, we can extinguish the fires. Sometimes I wonder about all of the relationships, the friendships that would have happened if the British had not seeded this hate trope in our hearts and our minds. Can you imagine how many relationships have actually faltered? How much friction and strife has been created by this one word? This is how pernicious it is. And anything we can do to get rid of this will be a wonderful, wonderful contribution. That's the sum total of what I've said. I've taken 5 minutes more than my allocated time. My apologies for that. I hope that we do have enough time now for questions and answers. I'm more than happy to take them. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much, Satish ji, for enlightening us. Been a very much enriching session. Satish ji, we have a couple of questions.
Jay.
Undoubtedly, caste has been a blot in our Hindu society, that is the Bharatiya society. In spite of that, over the years, including individuals like you, who have been constantly educating people how the Varna system has been misrepresented by the British, the sole objective is for them to divide and rule. In spite of this, we are still very much casteist society. And do you think, in your personal view, that the reintroduction of Gurukula system can eradicate such casteism in our society? Because they're very much successful in destroying the Gurukula system.
It's a wonderful question. The Gurukula system is a great way of healing and reintroducing a more natural understanding of how human beings can live and work together. That's vital and that's necessary, but it's not enough on its own. You see, when you have something like this, not only do you have to stop things from getting worse, you have to protect the truer knowledge and spread the truer knowledge as well. Both things have to happen. Now, one thing, you mentioned the word Varna. People should understand that our tradition, our Gyan, our Vidya is on the basis of darshan. It's not on the basis of making schemes up here and then experimenting in Samaj. It's on darshan. And so our rishis, they saw that there are 4 different types of human being. In the Gita, Sri Krishna ji says, I have created 4 Varna, Chatur Varna. And what he's saying is that there are human beings, some of them are intellectual, some of them are courageous, some of them are very, very good with money and mercurial, and others are simple. They want to create art, they want to bring beauty into the world. So this is a darshan of how people are. And what the Samaj was, it was an accommodation of that darshan. We were not trying to force something unnatural onto human beings. We were trying to create a way in which the natural way of human beings existing could be put into society so that they could contribute according to their aptitude, and society could derive the maximum benefit and satisfaction of that individual performing to their best ability. That's the way in which win-win works. And so what we have to do is to get back to a darshan-based understanding and reorganize ourselves in that manner. You see, that's not possible unless the root of this caste problem is recognized. Now, every person who has read the book or who has understood one of the talks, one of the most common pieces of feedback I get is that I'm now no longer guilty. I don't feel the guilt that I'm part of a civilization which was bullying our own members, which was acting in a manner which was so unpleasant to them. And that liberation makes a person more confident, and it also makes a person less fearful. When you know, then you can reach out to a person who now says, I'm a Dalit, and your Hindu dharma has made me into Dalit, and you say, well, actually, no, you're one of our brothers. In your ancestry, you had noble royal families. You know, most people don't know, but at the time of the British occupation, there were some 600 principalities and kingdoms. And of those, over 400 were ruled by Shudra kings. Yes. Now, the British, in the period that they occupied, they took most of the wealth from those Shudra kings, stole it themselves, reduced the Shudras using the Shudra community, using the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act to poverty, and then using divide and rule, said, oh, by the way, it was the Brahmins who have done this. So that's how they did it. And the way we heal it is by getting everyone to understand who the real villain was, and to stop looking at our own Bharatiya family with fear and with suspicion, but with compassion and understanding. And let's recognize that all of the communities have suffered as a result. And we have to move forward beyond this. Otherwise, our children will carry on living out hatred that somebody 6,000 miles away planted 200 plus years ago.
Satish, I have another question pertaining to what you have said. In your slide, you have invoked Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and you also just mentioned about Krishna. We as Hindus, we very much read Ramayana, Mahabharata, but even till date, many of our own Hindus are not aware that the Valmiki, Pashurama, and Vedas haven't been born from a Brahmin family. Do you think our this kind of to say ignorant paved the way for conversion? How failed have we been as a Hindu society in terms of conversion?
So, number one, I don't find any blame with our society, nor do I think that we have had a failure. The enemies who came to Bharat are the most violent barbarians that humanity has ever known. Across Europe, Christianity burned women at the stake so they could have access to their children. Remember, people who are barbarians like this, they want to destroy Sanskriti by preventing it being passed to the children. Why do you think these horrific barbarians always looked to replace indigenous schools with their own schools? In Canada, we're now getting the news of the residential schools where Christians used to kidnap native Canadian children and take them into schools, and they would beat them if they spoke their own language. This is the violence and the nature of these people who came. And the fact that we still have an incredible core of a dharmic understanding, and we are still now watering it and it's growing again and it's reaching out to the wider world, that this is the way in which civilized people live, that's something to take credit on. We have trauma, we have transgenerational trauma, we have civilizational trauma, and that manifests with all sorts of weaknesses. It manifests with all sorts of fear-based behavior, but I don't hold any of our family responsible for it. I think that we can move beyond that, and whatever difficulties and weaknesses are there, we heal them, we fix them, and we can fix them. In our Dharma Shastras, in our Vidya, in our Gurukuls, our Rishis, our Shastra, there is so much teaching. We have Gyan Yoga to heal a confused mind, right? We have Hatha Yoga to heal a broken body. Right? We have Bhakti Yoga to strengthen a broken heart. There is nothing that we cannot repair. It's just that we need to understand how to do it, and we need to become skillful in doing it. So I don't have any sense of guilt or blame for any member of our family. The fact that we have survived is an extraordinary fact. And the fact that we are now moving from survival to revival, and then I say from revival, we will move to thrival, okay? We will get to that stage, is a wonderful testament. We are the only pagan civilization that they call us who have done this. And when we show the way, all of the other pre-Christian, pre-Abrahamic civilizations, they will also reconnect and find their way. They were all dharmic civilizations in the true sense of the word dharma, before these barbarians started to convert and to murder and rape and pillage.
Thank you so much, Satishji. Gopiji and Nikunji, if you have any question, you can field.
Thank you, Abhilash. Satishji, I have a question regarding have you heard about the hooked cross?
The Hakenkreuz.
The Hakenkreuz. This was used by the Nazis.
That's correct.
So, in fact, Hitler never used a swastika. It was more of a Hakenkreuz cross, and it's in English translation is a hooked cross rather. It's a double S, like one cross on another. So why did they later on did the seems like Hitler was more of a Christian missionary plant who committed such a genocide on you call it a Holocaust on the Jews. So why did missionaries try to Any idea?
You know, we have a number of things yet to learn. One, Hitler in his books, he wrote, "I'm a committed Christian." Right? I have lived my life as a committed Catholic, and that is the principle that I follow. We have to recognize that the massacres that were inflicted by the Nazis on the Jewish people were not done just by the Nazis on the Jewish, but by um, any particular group. It was supported by a huge ecosystem. All of those trucks that were driving around Europe that the Nazis were driving, they had Ford engines. The fuel was provided to them by Standard Oil, American oil company. Right? There were vast reserves. The steel that laid the tracks for the trains to get to the concentration camps came from American companies. This was a massive mobilization of Christian force to exterminate the Jews, and it was all based on hatred. Now, the Hakenkreuz is a throughout the Second World War, none of the Germans referred to it as a swastika. It was a Britisher called Murphy who called it a swastika. He's the first person who used the word swastika and then made the connection. And ever since then, it's been viewed as the swastika is a Nazi symbol and Hindus are terrible. It's just another act of missionary mischief. Aur kuch nahi hai. There is no substance behind it. In America, a Jewish senator only earlier this year wanted to have the swastika deemed as a hate symbol and to be taught as a hate symbol. And myself and some of the people, Nikunj Trivedi ji, Richa Gautam ji, the Kona team, we had many conversations about this, and we put forward the evidence. We held some conversations, and then as a result of it, the senator withdrew. He withdrew his allegations, and the Jewish community actually supported us in saying this is not a hate symbol. And so that's a big step forward. But it's part of the same process. Gopiji, the way we have to look at these is every time somebody attacks us like this, we have to view it as an invitation to educate. Right? Because we don't go out there with missionary zeal telling the world, you know, hum aise hain, ye hamari vidya hai, hamare ye sanskar hai, ye hamare principles. We don't do that. But when we're attacked, we should view it as an invitation to engage and to educate and put our side of the position forward. And this is how I view it. And so, yes, this is another learning that we have to understand. We were never part of any hate mechanism. There are some people who blame Hindus and say things like the RSS and so on, who say they got their inspiration from Nazis and Hitler and everything. But you have to remember, in terms of theft and in terms of murder, the British outranked the Nazis by a factor of 10. Right? There were 10 times more people killed by the British occupation. It was so horrific that most of our memory, we don't want to even look at what happened to us. Without feeling unbelievable pain, we can't look at it yet. We have to go there and look at it. And so at that time, Hitler was nothing compared to the Nazis, compared to the British. And anybody was willing to make a deal with anyone, whether it was Mussolini or Hitler, to get rid of the people who Tagore said, not even God can trust the British in the dark. So if you start to place things in context, we actually are not doing too badly. We are not the bad people that we have been painted to be around the world. We need to tell our story now.
Hello.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'd finished. I was waiting the next wonderful question.
Oh, sorry.
Any other questions,
any
Gopiji?
questions?
जी अगर कोई और सवाल है, कोई और प्रश्न है
I
तो
think, yeah.
please.
I'm okay. Carry on.
I think that's all at this point.
Wonderful.
Satish, on behalf of VHS Karnataka, thank Pandit Satish Sharma ji for accepting the request and enlightening us, our viewers, on such an important topic of current age on the Samvada. Thank you,
my pleasure,
Pandit Sharma ji, for enlightening us.
Thank you very much for the
Thank
invitation.
you, Nikunji. Thank you, Nikunji. Thank you, Ramesh, and thank you,
May I
and also our
conclude?
technical team, Tejas, Ishwaraya, and
Okay. May I
please.
conclude with one request and one shout out?
Please.
We have got a lot of work to do to undo this hatred, this caste trope. And so not only do our Hindu brothers need to know about it, but many of our family who converted to Christianity because of this, they need to know about it. And so we have Christmas coming up. So why not send some Hindu good news to all of our Christian friends and send them a copy of the book? Okay, Notion Press are a wonderful publishing and printing house. It's available on Notion Press. Please do send it to as many of our family members possible, and especially youngsters. All the youngsters who are reading it, I'm getting such good feedback from them. And the book is a very easy to read, easy to give away book, and it will make a dramatic change in the way in which we think of ourselves. Remember, to be born a Hindu is not to be born in a caste. Thank you very much for those final, for the opportunity of having some final words.
Thank you very much. It is a fantastic
Thank you,
session.
Panditji. Thank
Jai Shri Ram.
Thank you.
Last but not least,
Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
thank you all. Let me conclude this. Making the Samvada success. And as said, like Pandit's latest book, Caste Conversion, A Colonial Conspiracy, is available on Amazon. Ebook is also available. Please go ahead and do read it. And also, as Pandit mentioned, do give the good news to the other side where they can for the Christmas. So let them have the good news. And please visit and register at vhsindia.org for the further amazing online sessions of VHS. So thank you all. Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.